The tallest poppy, and the tallest poppy in Australia. The tallest poppy refers to a person who stands out because of visible success or achievement or status or ambition. Someone who is above the rest in a social or professional sense. In the context of Australia, it's a term that's commonly used, the tall poppy syndrome, where that same person may attract criticism, skepticism, or even a great deal of pressure from the people around them for standing out too much. Now, its origins come from Rome and Greek political storytelling. We understand that. But how did it become popular in Australia, and how is it associated with Australia? Well, they didn't invent the concept, but they've adopted the phrase heavily in modern culture, turned it into a widely discussed social idea that you're not allowed to be unique or stand out too much. So it applies to everyday social behavior, work, sports, public life. Over time, Australia became one of the countries most strongly linked to the modern cultural usage of that very term. Even though the origin is ancient and European. So I'm Mario Leone. This is the Voices of Victory channel. Welcome aboard. Don't forget to click the Patreon link below to support. I have a lot of good, solid friends in Australia. People that genuinely care about there. People that have impacted my life in great ways. And I want to share this with those very people that I care about. Today's episode is evidence for tall poppy syndrome in Australia. This is going to be a very strong, deep, research-based summary, and I'm going to go over it. The tall poppy syndrome is best understood as a documented cultural pattern where visible success and self-promotion can actually attract a lot of social pushback from a lot of people in the circles, especially in certain Australian contexts that occur. That research does not describe rejection of success. Success is okay, but it describes how people respond to highly visible people in society and the public self-promotion. So here's the deal. I think it's important for me to share with all my Australian friends and the people I care about is people have blurred the lines between actual true confidence and humility, having that humbleness, along with, let's say, narcissism. So I think that line has been blurred, and it's been blurred everywhere else, but this is a common term. And I think it's important to know that humility is indeed powerful. It is important to be humble. Humble prevents that overconfidence, or the overconfidence that bleeds and blends into arrogance. You follow? That's what's really important for you to know. So it's okay to be humble and bold. When you combine the two, it changes the dynamic completely. Because just being humble alone, it might be quiet. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to be grounded, but it's also good to be bold. Bold doesn't necessarily mean stand out, but bold could say, I'm going to stand in my uniqueness because I'm going to be different from everybody else. And that's okay. And I think some people are afraid of standing in their own uniqueness. There was studies actually done, so I'm going to come into the facts right here. The first fact is that the high achievers trigger different emotional reactions. And there is research. And I did the research that connected to Norman T. Feather, affiliated with Australian Journal of Psychology, and what was actually tested. They did a controlled study measuring the emotional responses towards high achievers, average performers, and outcomes relating to failures and mistakes involving several different groups. But here's what the data actually showed. So what the data shows is people don't respond to failure in the same way in all cases. When a high achiever experiences failure, the reactions are more likely to include some sort of approval or satisfaction compared to the similar failure in just average performers. So the reinforcing fact with this idea is the status changes how an event is actually judged. So the same outcome gets different emotional reactions depending on who it is and who it actually happens to. Interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. The second fact is that the everyday Australian communication discourages standing out too strongly. Now, here's the research base behind this. Bert Peters is a cultural linguistics researcher on Australian communication. And what was studied was the language patterns, the patterns in the workplace, public speech, and everyday social interaction. And what the analysis actually showed is that communication tends to favor modesty in the groups and in the way the groups actually align with people. And people are more socially accepted when they avoid sounding overly self-important or overly focused on personal status. So you can see how Tallest Poppy comes into play. But I think what the biggest problem, and this is my own commentary, is people mistaken the Tallest Poppy. They mistake confidence for arrogance. They mistake that, and it's very easy to do. But the reinforcing fact behind this is how people talk in everyday life often rewards staying grounded and discourages talking yourself up. Now, there is a fine line between confidence and a braggart, and I think that's what's important to understand here. There's a difference between narcissist, confidence, and a braggart. There's a fine line difference, and we don't want to bleed too much into one. And what tends to happen is people might use the Tallest Poppy syndrome as a phrase when they misunderstand or they socially misjudge the confident person for the narcissist or the braggart. And that is what's happening. Those social lines have gotten blurred, and I want to bring that out. I want to bring that out to all my Australian friends. Please understand that. Please understand that I'm very kind and compassionate in expressing this, and it's important for people to know. So people will talk themselves up. And there is a difference between, let's say, talking yourself up and, of course, talking yourself up so much that you sound like a braggart. There's a fine line difference with that, right? But we have to look at people that, let's say, have careers that stand out. You know, they have to be able to stand confident in what they do. And other people might not like the fact that they're bold in what they do. But humility is also a valuable trait as well. If you're bold and humbleness, that can actually go together. Fact number 3, social comparison and envy actually molds people's reactions, especially when it comes to visible success. So the research based on this was, there was a social psychology experiment, again by Feather and other researchers. What was measured was reactions in regards to envy, fair judgments, and attitudes towards inequality, and responses to differences in those statuses. That's what's really interesting. So what the data actually showed is that people are more sensitive to comparison and status. In the differences between comparison and status, they tend to react more negatively towards those that are high visible achievers. So I'm sure there are people in Australia that are high achievers that could be very confident, not arrogant, not narcissistic, and they get misunderstood as the Tallest Poppy, and people start to cut them down. So that's what's important to understand. Now that can happen anywhere in the world, but these are specific studies there. So the reinforcing fact is that human brains compare status. They compare the status, and they compare that stronger awareness of the differences in that status. And what that does is it creates very strong emotional reactions across people. The fourth fact is that the Australians commonly recognize the pattern in everyday experience. That's the biggest interesting thing here, is that the evidence based on this is the surveys that are done, the workplace reports, the interviews, and the public discussions are all there. And what consistently appears over and over again, that people frequently describe situations where self-promotion gets criticized, and it bleeds into that accidental confusion, that social misjudgment between what? Between confidence, being a braggart, and most of all, narcissism. That's where the lines get blurred. So self-promotion is criticized. The confidence gets misunderstood, misjudged as arrogance. So when people start to socially judge, they do it incorrectly, and they do it according to the cultural aspects. Standing out creates social conflict, and it creates confusion. The reinforcing fact with this is that when many people inside a given culture, when they notice independently the same social pattern in real life, it strengthens the case. It makes the case stronger. It strengthens the case that the pattern is actually culturally relevant and culturally meaningful. And that's the point of this episode. So I want to conclude with this, and then we're going to go from here and wrap it up. The research supports the clear pattern where social interactions are influenced by visible status and self-promotion. So what you can understand is the core idea behind everything here is actually supported. But the strength and the certainty are overstated. They're overstated in popular explanations. So what do I mean by that? Well, we could take a look at a consensus and it might tell a very unique story. So what is solid and well supported with all this? Well, the research is showing a lot of support for a few different components. That status actually affects judgment, and it's repeatable across studies, not just Australia specifically, but it's repeatable. It's happening. The second idea is that social comparison influences reactions to success. And there's a strong evidence that people compare themselves to others quickly. So we have upward comparison. There's downward comparison and there's upward comparison. And what it does between you and I is it triggers envy. It makes people uncomfortable. And there's concerns about fairness with that. So these reactions, they influence attitudes, especially towards high achievers. This is a well-established area in social psychology. And the third key point, which really puts the nail into the coffin, is Australia has a culturally recognized tall poppy norm. And in Australia, there's that consistent measurement, both qualitative, the quality of it, and linguistically, the language of it, the evidence that humility is socially rewarded. I believe humility is beautiful for confidence, but there is a gray area here. Is that when confidence slightly bleeds into arrogance, people will start to misjudge, or they may look at someone who's confident, and because they're not confident themselves, they will look at that person in a negative light. So there's overt self-promotion, and that is frowned upon. Real simple. There's a social sensitivity to that, to the concept of ideas of overt self-promotion. Now, don't post yourself too much. You never know what people will believe in, right? No, you can't be an actor or an actress. Don't do that. People like us don't do that, right? And they start to talk in that way. So people are frequently recognizing the tallest poppy, and they discuss cutting it down. So it's widely documented in cultural analysis and surveys. That's what I want you to understand. So what's overstated is that Australians uniquely resent success in their own way. That's less certain, and that's overstated, okay? That's not supported as a strong scientific claim by any means. There's sensitivity to the visibility of status, not success itself, but there's a strong admiration for success when it's framed as humble or actually relatable. So the issue is not success. It's not success at all. It's the expression of their style around that success. So when it comes to Australia, it operates uniformly. The patterns actually vary a great deal by industry, personality, subculture, the socioeconomic background, and even the region. These are all things that are impacting it. So it's not a single unified national behavioral rule. I want to make that very clear. It strongly predicts outcomes because it connects to the way we form our identity in a very direct and casual way. Now, this is harder to prove, but we can measure attitudes, reactions, and the way people communicate. But long-term identity, you got to remember, identity is more of a constant. It's not something that's fixed or finished or complete. But the long-term identity, that formation, those effects, they're inferred through the studies that have quality behind them and any data that correlates and most of all, the theory around culture. So there hasn't been any direct causal experiments, at least in regards to identity. But what we can understand is you are a constant. You are constantly unfolding. Your identity is always unfolding. It's not fixed, finished, complete. If a person reaches their PhD, that doesn't make your identity a finish line. We are constantly undergoing construction. You can think about it that way. The identity is undergoing construction all the time. So if you're an actor or an actress or some of the people that I know from Australia down under, your identity is under construction always until you die. And that's the thing. The finish line is death. It's like you have all your life to construct and work on that. And that's important for whatever field you're in. So you see how interesting it is. So Australia shows a recognizable cultural norm that places a social value on being modest and humble, and it limits overt self-promotion. But if you are a confident person and your industry requires that you're front and center, then you have to be front and center, even though people will try to cut you down as a tall poppy. Just remember that. And that social psychology research supports the idea that status makes people very sensitive. They're sensitive to status. And there's a lot of social comparison. And there's a lot of those strong reactions to people that are high achievers because they actually stand out. That's where it gets interesting. However, the strength and the behavioral impact of this norm, it varies across individuals, the context that it's in, as well as the industry. So some of my friends are in different areas of their life out there, and the tallest poppy has always been a big deal. So when you stand in your uniqueness, you're going to have to face some kind of naysayer. And the reason why you're going to have to face the naysayers, because it actually shows you and helps you understand that you're going to have the courage to be disliked at some point. Because when you face your naysayers, it means you're doing something actually important. And people need you to fail. They need you to underachieve because it proves that they can't do it. So to all my wonderful Aussie friends in Australia, you're all my mates out there. I love you all. I absolutely love you all. And I hope all of you reach the levels that your heart desires without holding back and without having any fear, because you don't have to be the tallest poppy. You can still be humble, strong, and bold. Have a great day. Don't forget to click the Patreon link below. Take care.